Trump's disdain for facts and his penchant for magical thinking and conspiracy theories mesh well with the worldview of the Christian right, which sees itself as under attack by the satanic forces of secular humanism embodied in the media, academia, the liberal establishment, Hollywood, and the Democratic Party. In this worldview, climate change is not real, Barack Obama is a Muslim, and millions of people voted illegally in the 2016 election. The followers of the Christian right are Manichaeans. They see the world in black and white, good and evil, them and us. Trump's call in his speech in Poland for a crusade against the godless hordes of Muslims fleeing from the wars and chaos we created replicates the view of the Christian right. Christian right leaders, in a sign of support, went to the White House on July 10, 2017, to pray over Trump. 2 days later, Pat Robertson showed up there to interview the president for his Christian broadcasting network. If the alliance between these zealots and the government succeeds, it will snuff out the last vestiges of American democracy. On the surface, it appears to be incongruous that the Christian right would rally behind a slick New York real estate developer who is a public serial philanderer and adulterer, has no regard for the truth, is consumed by greed, does not appear to read or know the Bible, routinely defrauds and cheats his investors and contractors, expresses a crude misogyny and even cruder narcissism, and appears to yearn for despotism. In fact, these are the very characteristics that define many of the leaders of the Christian right. Trump has preyed on desperate people through the thousands of slot machines in his casinos, his sham university, and his real estate deals. Megachurch pastors prey on their followers by extracting, quote, seed offerings, end quote, love gifts, end quote, tithes and donations, and by selling miracle healings along with, quote, prayer cloths, end quote, self-help books, audio and video recordings, and even protein shakes. Pastors have established within their megachurches, as Trump did in his businesses, despotic fiefdoms. They cannot be challenged or questioned any more than an omnipotent Trump could be challenged on the reality television show The Apprentice, and they seek to replicate their little tyrannies on a national scale, with white men in charge. The personal piety of many of the ministers who lead the Christian right is a facade. Their private lives are usually marked by hedonistic squalor that includes mansions, private jets, limousines, retinues of bodyguards, personal assistants and servants, shopping sprees, lavish vacations and sexual escapades that rival those carried out by Trump. They use the church's tax-exempt status to fund their extravagant lifestyles. They also engage in the nepotism found in the Trump administration, elevating family members to prominent or highly paid positions and passing on the businesses to their children. The Christian right's scandals, which give a glimpse into the sordid lives of these multimillionaire pastors, are legion. Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker's Praise the Lord Club, for example, raked in as much as $1 million a week before Jim Bakker went to prison for nearly 5 years. He was convicted of fraud and other charges in 1989 because of the $158 million scheme in which followers paid for vacations that never materialized. As the Bakker empire came apart, there also were accusations of drug use and rape. Tammy Faye died in 2007, and now Jim Bakker is back peddling survival food for the end of days and telling his significantly reduced television audience that anyone who opposes Trump is the Antichrist. Paul and Jan Crouch, who gave the Bakkers their start, founded Trinity Broadcasting Network, TBN, the world's largest televangelist network, now run by their son Matt and his wife Laurie. Viewers were encouraged to call prayer counselors at the toll-free number shown at the bottom of the screen. It was a short step from talking with a prayer counselor to making a love gift and becoming a partner in Trinity Broadcasting, and then sending in more money during one of their frequent praise-a-thons. The Crouchers reveled in tasteless kitsch as Trump does. They sat during their evening broadcast in Louis XVI-inspired sets, replete with gold rococo and red velvet, glittering chandeliers, and a gold-painted piano. Stained glass windows loomed overhead. The network's emblem, which Paul Crouch wore on the pocket of his blue double-breasted blazer, featured a crown, a lion, a horse, a white dove, a cross, and Latin phrases, among other elements. The Crouchers would have been at home in Trump Tower, where the president had a faux Trump crest, allegedly plagiarized, and has decorated his penthouse as if it were also part of Versailles. The Crouchers were masters of manipulation. They exhorted viewers to send in checks for $1,000 even if they could not afford it. Write the check anyway, Paul Crouch, who died in 2013, told them, as a, quote, step of faith, end quote, and the Lord would repay them many times over. Quote, do you think God would have any trouble getting 1,000 extra to you somehow? End quote, he asked, during one praise-a-thon broadcast. Viewers, many of whom struggled with despair and believed that miracles and magic alone held them back from the abyss, often found it impossible to resist the emotional pressure. When I reported on the Crouchers for my 2006 book, American Fascists, The Christian Right and the War on America, they earned nearly $1 million a year in salary from the network, had the use of 30 ministry-owned houses, including 2 multi-million-dollar oceanfront mansions in the resort town of Newport Beach, California, a mountain retreat near Lake Arrowhead, and a ranch in Texas. They traveled on a $7.2 million 19-seat Canada Air turbojet, had access to fleets of luxury vehicles, and charged most of their expenses from meals and hotel rooms to the purchasing of antiques on company credit cards, according to former employees. Trinity Broadcasting Network is home to many of the worst charlatans in the Christian right, including the popular healer Benny Hinn, who says Jesus will appear at one of his crusades. Adam was a superhero who could fly to the moon, and one day the dead will be raised by watching the network from inside their coffins. Hinn claims his anointings have cured cancer, AIDS, deafness, blindness, and numerous other ailments and physical injuries. Those who have not been cured, he said, had not sent in enough money. These religious hucksters are some of the most accomplished con artists in the country, a trait they share with the current occupant of the Oval Office. I did not use the word fascist lightly when I wrote about the Christian right. I spent several hours at the end of 2 years of reporting with 2 of the country's foremost scholars on fascism, Fritz Stern and Robert O. Paxton. Did this, quote, Christian, end quote, ideology fit the parameters of classic fascism? Was it virulent enough and organized enough to seize power? Would it go to the ruthless extremes of previous fascist movements to persecute and silence dissent? Has our deindustrialized society replicated the crippling despair, alienation, and rage that always feed fascist movements? The evangelicalism promoted by the Christian right is very different from the evangelicalism and fundamentalism of a century ago. The emphasis on personal piety that defined the old movement, the call to avoid the contamination of politics, has been replaced by Christian Reconstructionism, also called Dominionism. This new ideology is about taking control of all institutions, including the government, to build a, quote, Christian, end quote, nation. Rousas John Rushdoony, in his 1973 book, The Institutes of Biblical Law, first articulated it. Rushduni argued that God gives the elect, just as he gave Adam and Noah, dominion over the earth to build a Christian society. Their state will come about with the physical eradication of the forces of Satan. It is the duty of the Church and the elect to rescue the world so Christ can return. The secular humanist society must be eradicated. The 10 Commandments will form the basis of our legal system. Creationism or intelligent design will be taught in public schools. People they consider social deviants, including homosexuals, immigrants, secular humanists, feminists, Jews, Muslims, criminals, and those dismissed as, quote, nominal Christians, end quote, meaning Christians who do not embrace the Christian right's perverted and heretical interpretation of the Bible, will be silenced, imprisoned, or killed. The role of the federal government will be reduced to protecting property rights, quote, homeland, end quote, security, and waging war. Church organizations will be funded and empowered by the government to run social welfare programs. The poor, condemned for sloth, indolence, and sinfulness, will be denied government assistance. The death penalty will be expanded to include, quote, moral crimes, end quote, including apostasy, blasphemy, sodomy, and witchcraft, as well as abortion, which will be treated as murder. Women will be subordinate to men. Those who practice other faiths will become, at best, second-class citizens or outcasts. The wars in the Middle East will be defined as religious crusades against Muslims. There will be no separation of church and state. The only legitimate voices will be, quote, Christian, end quote. America, they believe, will become an agent of God. Those who defy the, quote, Christian, end quote, authorities will be agents of Satan. Tens of millions of Americans are already hermetically sealed within this bizarre worldview. They are fed a steady diet of conspiracy theories and lies on the internet, in their churches, in Christian schools and colleges, and on Christian television and radio. Elizabeth Dilling, who wrote The Red Network and was a Nazi sympathizer, is required reading. Thomas Jefferson, who favored separation of church and state, is ignored. The Christian propaganda hails the, quote, significant contributions, end quote, of the Confederacy. Senator Joseph McCarthy, who led the anti-communist witch hunts in the 1950s, is rehabilitated as an American hero. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, along with the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Somalia, and Libya, are defined as part of the worldwide battle against satanic Islamic terror. Presently, 42% of the U.S. public believes in creationism or intelligent design, and nearly a third of the population, 94 million people, consider themselves evangelical. Those who remain in the reality-based universe often dismiss these malcontents as buffoons. They do not take seriously the huge segment of the public, mostly white and working class, who, because of economic distress, have primal yearnings for vengeance, new glory, and moral renewal, and are easily seduced by magical thinking. These are the yearnings and emotions Trump has exploited. Those who embrace this movement feel they are persecuted by dark and sinister groups bent on their destruction. They elevate themselves to the role of holy warriors with a noble calling and purpose. They sanctify the rage and hypermasculinity that are the core of fascism. The rigidity and simplicity of their belief, which includes being anointed for a special purpose in life by God, are potent weapons in the fight against their own demons and desire for meaning. Quote, evil when we are in its power is not felt as evil, but as necessity or even a duty, end quote, Simone Weil wrote. These believers, like all fascists, condemn the reality-based world as contaminated, decayed, and immoral. This world took their jobs, it destroyed their future, it ruined their communities, it doomed their children, it flooded their lives with alcohol, opioids, pornography, sexual abuse, jail sentences, domestic violence, deprivation, and despair. And then, from the depths of suicidal despair, they discovered that God has a plan for them. God will save them. God will intervene in their lives to promote and protect them. God has called them to carry out his holy mission in the world and to be rich, powerful, and happy. The rational, secular forces, those that speak in the language of fact and reason, are hated and feared, for they seek to pull believers back into the, quote, culture of death, end quote, that nearly destroyed them. The magical belief system, as it was for impoverished German workers who flocked to the Nazi Party, is an emotional life raft. It is all that supports them. The only way to blunt this movement is to reintegrate these people into the economy, to give them economic stability through good wages and benefits, to restore their self-esteem.